Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Listen with Vobes. Just making sure I'm on the right channel. And yes, apologies for a little bit late there. I was just waiting for my kettle to boil on the Essie. It's just coming up to the boil. I thought, come on, I've got to go live. They'll all think I'm talking to myself again. And now I've just soaked the desk here. Oh, that's a shame. I'll have to use my handkerchief to dry the desk. I don't want to get my book wet. Anyway, hello and welcome along. Today I am drinking some herbal infusions here with lemon and ginger. Grated lemon, chopped lemon and grated ginger. Not powders or anything like that. Fresh ingredients with boiling water over the top, steeping quite merrily in there at the moment. So that's all good, and I shall have a slurp of that in a second. Let's say hello. Welcome, by the way, to it's not the first in the new year, is it? It's the first of the week. So hello to the lovely Julia, to Turbo Stream, to Audrey Forbes, to Steve G, to Cooper 68, to Nigel Sadler, to Justine Jones, Billabong O'Neill, John F. Who else? We've got Sean's Garden Diary, Dave over yonder, and anybody else who happens to be coming along. 26 people currently viewing, which is marvellous. Oh, hang on, I've got to scroll down a bit. There we go. The Green Man, good afternoon to you. And Justine Jones, I've said. Search for YouTube. I'm new, but what is the Vobe Show? The Vobe Show is it's on the Vobe Show channel. If you put in the Vobe Show into YouTube, it will come up Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, 8 o'clock UK time. So we're at Greenwich Mean Time at the moment, I think, here. So it's a hour and a half live show of mayhem and chaos, mainly. Jenny Gage, noises off. Hello, Jenny. Nice to see you with noises off. Did you hear the noises off? That was me just getting myself all organised. Good afternoon. Hello to Dudley Sawyer. To Lee Lawson. Oops, couldn't get into the live version, but here now. That's good. I have chamomile tea with honey this afternoon, says Turbo Stream. It's frustrating when that happens. Oh, it is frustrating. I know. Julia has a lot of troubles getting in to the show. Anyway, here we all are. It's becoming a bit of a tea. Everyone tells us about the tea. This is a nice thing about this. It's a very sort of genteel little thing, this hour between four. So do share what teas you're drinking, and if you've got biscuits, pass them round. I'm just going to give this a little bit longer to steep. Thank you. Not quite sure what that is. It's probably just me telling me I'm alive. I am live, not alive. I realise I'm alive. Ed Loud says hello, is here. Yes, been having a mean time in Greenwich. Poor old Ed. I'm sorry you're having a mean time. You get it all the time, don't you? That mean time. Right, so we are on chapter, goodness knows what chapter it was now, 4, was it? Chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, part 2. This is part 4 of our reading. So, I hope you remember what was happening, because I can't. Lee Lawson says, I need cucumber sandwiches. It's very, very genteel, that is. You asked what I'm drinking. Arctic Fire. What the hell is that? That sounds very potent. As Dr. Trump woke next morning, he was already hating Mr. Pervarious. Oh, yes. He'd caught him, hadn't he, coming out, having spied on Margaret, who is, I think that's the woman that comes to visit regularly. She's the woman in plain clothes. Even in his dreams, the man had remained with him all night like a bedsore, and now that dawn had come, the image of his skulking there in the bushes with his grin and his cigarette end reappeared in all its rank offensiveness. After all, what was the man doing there at that time of night? What indeed? It was Dr. Trump's clear duty to find out. But how? Since, in the circumstances, he could hardly be expected to reopen the subject. Could he ever hope to know? With a moan of sheer helplessness over the unfairness of events, Dr. Trump did something that he had not done since early childhood. He turned over and lay face downwards on the pillow. Poor old Dr. Trump. Mary Hammond and Philip Hammond have arrived. Good afternoon, Richard and everybody. Nigel Sadler, I think I've said that. Alan Sandell, greeting folks. 6 hours behind you this morning. Coffee here. Good for you, sir. Just waiting for this to just seep out every last bit of goodness. And today should have been a happy day. All the week he'd been looking forward to it, fondly and caressing the occasion in his mind. And why? Because Dame Eleanor had invited him to tea. Tea at the Cedars, Putney Heath, at 4:30. And we're all having tea at just after 4. How delightful. It was enough to make any man contented. For Bishop Warple, the suffragan bishop, was to be there. And already Dr. Trump saw the scene as clearly as though he was peeping through the keyhole. The gleaming, crested silver of the teapot, the shining milk jug and sugar basin, the flickering spirit flame beneath the kettle, the priceless Crown Derby, the 3-tier cake stand, the polished fireguard with the flames respectfully warming the ecclesiastical gaiters, the bowl of pot puree on the occasional table, himself eating an anchovy roll, the ancestors enframed around the walls, the pretty maid in the frilly uniform, the rich tapestry curtains, the conversation lofty but genial, the elderly spaniel slumbering on the rug. Not that he had actually been inside the Cedars. It was precisely because it was his first visit that it meant so much. It stood for social recognition. Once arrived there, he had, so to speak, arrived. He was, indeed, so much preoccupied by the thought that at breakfast he scarcely touched the lightly scrambled eggs that his housekeeper had provided. Over lunch it was the same. Thoughts far away and no appetite. And then for Dr. Trump began the real torment. How to get there? That was the problem, for he had no car. A hire car, perhaps? But hire cars are expensive, and the very last thing he wanted was to appear extravagant or ostentatious. A taxi, possibly. But supposing the butler opened the front door as he drew up, wouldn't he look rather foolish and last-minute-ish, fumbling for sixpences and threepence pieces when he should have been handing in his hat and glove? It was then that the idea came to Dr. Trump that he would walk. There was something manly and vigorous in the idea. It wasn't far to the Cedars, no more than 1.25 miles, and if he allowed himself plenty of time, say half an hour or 35 minutes, he could positively stroll. He liked the picture of himself as he entered the drawing-room unconcernedly, his face aglow with sheer animal well-being. The first setback occurred punctually at 3:55, just as he was ready to leave. He had already adjusted the angle of his hat in the mirror and was reaching down into the hall stand for his umbrella when he discovered that it was not there. Then he remembered, and as he did so, a bomb of ice exploded in his stomach. He had left his umbrella and his overshoes in the day nursery. They were tucked neatly away behind the doll's house, so neatly, however, that a cleaner would not have found them by now. And once found, how would they be accounted for? But Dr. Trump was not to be deflected. He went over to the windows and studied the weather. There was certainly no call for overshoes, and none that he could see for an umbrella. The sky was clear, except for a cloud or two over Walham Green, and there was a pleasant breeze blowing. It was, in fact, the very afternoon for a saunter. Without further delay, therefore, Dr. Trump set out his neatly folded kid gloves, held firmly in his hands. He didn't want to hurry, and as he walked, he looked about him. Really, the gardens of the hospital were charming, quite charming, and since he had excluded the children from the front paths, everything looked distinctly fresher and more pleasing. The grass edges, in particular, showed improvement. There was now geometrical, even cliff-edge abruptness to the lawns that appealed to his whole sense of beauty. But already there was something else that was occupying Dr. Trump's thoughts. His shoes, his new shoes, were troubling him. There was some invisible constriction across the instep. Not to put too fine a point on it, they were too tight. And the further he walked, the tighter they became. And now, as if red-hot bars had been inserted just below his arches, well, there was only one thing for it. He would get as far as he... There was only one thing for it if he could get as far, and that was to sit down and ease them. At the corner of St. Mark's Avenue and Wendover Gardens, right at the Putney Heath end, that is, a thoughtful borough council had placed a park seat. It was a pleasant spot after I'm mucking this up. At the corner of St. Mark's Avenue and Wendover Gardens, right at the Putney Heath end, that is, a thoughtful borough council had placed a park seat. It was a pleasant spot, much sought after by lovers, with a telephone kiosk at one end and a wire mesh paper basket at the other. We just pause there for a second because I need to have a slurp here. We know that there's going to be catastrophe coming. We just sense that in our waters. Ooh, delicious. Absolutely delicious. It was while he was resting on the seat with his shoes unlaced and supported only by his toes that the rain began. A mere few sultry drops at first, coming from an apparently clear sky. They startled him. He couldn't believe in them. He suspected birds, but it was rain all right, and while he sat there hurriedly lacing up his shoes once more, the downpour started. Because there was nowhere else to shelter, Dr. Trump moved into the telephone kiosk. Except for the panel of glass that was missing in the door panel, it was dry, bone dry inside, but bare. There was merely a dog-eared directory and a cardboard notice, "Out of order," on the little shelf where the instrument should have been. He had been inside the kiosk a full 5 minutes before he looked at his watch, and when he did so, he started. It showed 4:16. At this rate, he would have to make a bolt for it the very moment it stopped raining. And, what was worse, it showed no sign of stopping. At 4:20, it was still fairly lashing down, and it was not until 4:22 that it showed the least hint of slacking. But every minute was precious now. The rain, meanwhile, had lost its first fury and had set in steadily and thoroughly in the fashion that is good for lawns. It was patient-looking rain, and there seemed no reason why it should stop before nightfall. Dr. Trump looked at his watch. Good heavens, it was 4:25 already. This was frightful. Rain or no rain, if he was to get there at all, he would have to make a dash for it. He started off like a road racer, his arms swinging. But he had underestimated the length of Wendover Gardens and of Gresham Crescent, and there seemed no end to either of them. He went plodding on, wincing every time his foot touched the ground and getting steadily wetter. He was really wet by now. Then Dr. Trump heard the sound of a car and wondered if it could possibly be a taxi. The car itself was still coming down Evelyn Avenue ahead of him. Dr. Trump hurried forward. He and the vehicle reached the corner simultaneously, and his hand was raised to summon it before he realised its mistake. This was no ordinary car. It was daffodil yellow picked out in vermilion, and on the side were the words "Tutti Frutti" and "Only best cream used in our ices" were lettered in coach builder's scrollwork. At one glance, Dr. Trump At one glance, Dr. Trump hurriedly dropped his hand again and pretended that he'd been merely adjusting his hat. But it was too late. He had been observed. The appalling object drew up in front of him, and as he tried to slip round the back, a voice called out to him. "You want me?" it said. Yes, thank you. I mean, no," Dr. Trump replied, with a brief, chilling smile that was intended once and for all to get rid of the man. Italians, however, are a warm-hearted race, not easily chilled, and Mr. Rapporto, his name was displayed conspicuously on the door panel, was already concerned about Dr. Trump's welfare. "I drive you," he went on. "You get wet." Dr. Trump shrank back against the railings. No, really," he said firmly. I mustn't detain you." Mr. Rapporto gave a loud gruff. "You not detain me," he replied. I go home already." "Good afternoon," answered Mr. Trump, and started to walk away. But it was no use. Mr. Rapporto followed and drew level. I make no charge," he said. "I like it not to see you getting wet." "Good afternoon," Dr. Trump answered for the second time. Then Mr. Rapporto grew angry. "Perhaps I'm not good enough," he shouted. "You snob! You afraid your friends will see you?" Mr. Rapporto had raised his voice alarmingly. "Please, please," Dr. Trump said firmly. Immediately, Mr. Rapporto stopped the car. "That's better," he cried. "Get in. I want to know thanks." Dr. Trump hesitated. Inside, the car looked even more repellent than from the outside. It was full of cans and flat cardboard boxes, and now that it was alongside him, he was aware of a sticky smell that came pouring from it. It would be like sitting inside a blancmange. On the other hand, the rain was coming down harder again, and if he was to reach the Cedars, he would have to get in. He would have to get there somehow, and once in the car, surely it wouldn't be so bad. After all, if he entirely covered up his clerical collar with his hands, no one would ever notice him. It was simply an act of getting into the contraption that was so shaming, and to avoid prolonging the shame, he hurried. He was impetuous. He sprang. As he sprang, Mr. Rapporto cried out, "Mind the cornets!" Not coronets, the cornets. "Mind the cornets!" But it was too late. There was the sound of crunching as though 100 eggshells were being crushed at once. Dr. Trump hurriedly shifted his position, but it was too dark inside that little front compartment. He could not see properly what he was doing. His feet came to rest on something soft and yielding, and then there was the sound of crunching. "My God!" Mr. Rapporto exclaimed. "The wafers too! First the cornets, then the wafers!" Dr. Trump remained calm. "I will pay for what is broken," he said coldly. Mr. Rapporto let in the clutch. "You pay all right," he said. "You are ruining me." Dr. Trump did not reply, and Mr. Rapporto changed the subject. "Which church?" he asked. "What time of the service?" Dr. Trump tried to smile. "There is no church, no service," he said. "That is, I'm on my way to tea." Mr. Rapporto nodded. "Where does she live?" he asked. And again, Dr. Trump tried to smile, but this time no smile would come. "The Cedars, Putney Heath," was all he said. "Okie dokie," Mr. Rapporto answered. "You hold it tight." There was, however, nothing of which to hold tight. Dr. Trump sat there, insecure and miserable, conscious that with every jolt of the car he was flung against other boxes as fragile and as yielding as the two that he had just demolished. He said nothing. He merely bit his lower lip and closed his eyes. "Mamma mia, what a mistake to make," says Ben Reeve. "Sorry I'm late," says Andrew Norris. "I'm late. Let me sneak in and I'll take a look at the back." "What are you doing late at the back? You are naughty, Mr. Norris." It's all good fun, isn't it? It was because he had closed his eyes that he was unaware how far they had come. After one particular abrupt and vicious lurch, he took a quick and anxious look around him and saw, to his consternation, that they had reached the front gates of the Cedars. Immediately he sat bolt upright. Thank you, he said. That's far enough. But Mr. Rapporto took no notice. I finish the job, he replied. I not let you walk. I like you. As he said it, they turned the corner of the drive, and the house, white and spacious, came into view. Let me out, screamed Dr. Trump. Let me out. You drive me nuts, was all that Mr. Rapporto replied. The daffodil and vermilion vanlet came finally to a rest between an elderly and upright Daimler and a princely and highly lacquered Rolls. As Dr. Trump sat there, he could see the reflection of his own vulgar ice cream cart in the panel. He looked away and made ready to go bounding up the steps, then stopped, frozen with horror, as the front door was opened for him. "The cornets!" Mr. Rapporto was calling after him. "And the wafers! You pay me now? You pay me!" As Dr. Trump entered the drawing room, he gave a start of sheer surprise. It was exactly as he had imagined it. The silver tea service, the spirit lamp beneath the hanging kettle, the ancestors round the walls, even the spaniel slumbering on the rug. He peeped into the future and had been perfect and complete. He felt himself relaxing. Dame Eleanor rose as he came in. "You're late, Mr. Trump," she said. "We've eaten everything." Dr. Trump smiled. He had rehearsed the answer to this one. "Forgive me, Dame Eleanor," he said. "I sheltered for a moment to allow the worst to pass." But it was no use. "Worse? Worse of what?" Dame Eleanor asked. The rain," he replied. "Hasn't been raining here," Dame Eleanor told him. "You must have imagined it." As she spoke the words, Dame Eleanor darted a knowing glance in Bishop Warple's direction. The bishop returned the glance. His face was sharp-featured and avian, and as the mouth creased into a smile, the thin lips opened as though to release a shrill scream of birdsong. But all that emerged was titter. Won't do, you know. Won't do," he said, turning to Dr. Trump and waving a thin, episcopal forefinger. "Have to think of a better excuse next time." A feminine and supplementary titter from the window seat made Miss Dr. Trump glance apprehensively in that direction, and what he saw bewildered him. For now that he looked closely, he could see that Bishop Warple was in two places at once. He was there on the window seat as well as in front of the fireplace. The face, clearly outlined against the sky, showed the same needlepoint features, the same bright, malignant eye, the same peckish tilt of the neck. Then, noticing the difference in the crest, he realised that he was not looking at the bishop, but some lesser female Warple. The next moment, a tall, sad-looking man by the fire addressed nobody in particular. "It rained once in Roehampton," he said slowly. "I remember it. Cats and dogs at the end of the bright sunshine. Most extraordinary." Dr. Trump smiled gratefully. It was like that today," he said. The sad-looking man fixed his attention on him like a magistrate. "Were you there?" he asked. "I was caught in it," Dr. Trump replied. "No, at Roehampton." "No, at the top of St. Mark's Avenue." "Don't know it," the sad-looking gentleman answered. "This was years ago. I was playing tennis at the time. Lawn tennis, you know." There was a temporary respite while Dr. Trump sipped his tea and the others talked among themselves. The sad-looking man had just remembered something about the waterfall that he had once seen in Norway, and Bishop Warple was making signalling motions to his double in the window seat. He was inviting her to come and join them. Dr. Trump felt better. The tea was warming, and so was the fire. Too warm, in fact. It was making his... Sorry. Too warm, in fact. It was making his trouser legs steam. And as they steamed... they emitted a strong smell like wet sheep. Oh my goodness, I can visualise that so well. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to burst out laughing. Oh my goodness. Bishop Warple drew his breath sharply. Oh, it's not that funny. It's not that funny. Calm yourself. Oh, my eyes are watering up now. Oh, it smells. Oh, yes, I wiped the desk with it. Oh, dear. Right, where were we? Stop it. Stop making me laugh, for goodness sake. So, yes, Bishop Warple drew his breath sharply. "Someone's scorching," he observed. But it was another and a gentler voice, surprisingly close to Dr. Trump's ear, that took up the theme. A movement beside him caused him to turn his head, and he found himself looking full into the pale greenish eyes of Miss Warple. "Why, you're soaking wet," she said. "Not really," Dr. Trump assured her. "But you are," Miss Warple went on. "Why don't you go home and change? You'll catch your death of cold. Why don't you?" Here at last was someone being deliberately nice to him, and Dr. Trump responded. "I think perhaps I should," he replied. But really, I assure you, I won't, thank you. I mean, it's nothing. It's just dampness." Miss Warple drew closer. "That's the way pneumonia starts," she told him, neglecting to take precautions. But before Dr. Trump could reply, Dame Eleanor had spoken. "What are those two whispering about?" she asked, darting another of her quick, malicious glances at the bishop. "More tea, Dr. Trump?" Thank you, yes," Dr. Trump replied. I mean, no, that is, I still have some." "Well, when you've finished, why not take Miss Warple into the garden and let her show you the rhododendrons?" Dame Eleanor suggested. "That is, if it stopped raining." Again that hideous glance was exchanged, and again Dr. Trump tried to show that he was a good fellow, and he did not in the least mind being laughed at. But slowly and chillingly he became aware that it was no ordinary piece of mockery this time. Dame Eleanor was wearing the expression of someone who has brought off a lucky coup at cards, and the bishop was nodding his head up and down like a mandarin. They were evidently congratulating each other upon something, and with a sickly faint sensation, Dr. Trump guessed that he was the object of it. "Oh, do," Miss Warple said. "I love rhododendrons." Miss Warple, however, did not manage to get as far as the rhododendrons that she loved so much. Dr. Trump was still sitting on the springy edge of the couch, trying to appear comfortable and at ease with his teacup and saucer in his hand, when the door opened and Margaret came in. Dr. Trump looked up for a moment, and his expression changed instantly. At the memory of the last time he had seen her, spied on her, rather, and his thoughts afterwards, he blushed. He blushed a deep fiery red that would not die away. "Perhaps we ought to be looking at the rhododendrons after all?" "Oh, sorry. Perhaps we ought to be looking at the rhododendrons after all." "Oh, no, I was right the first time. Perhaps we ought to be looking at Perhaps we ought to look at the rhododendrons after all," he heard Miss Marple saying. Not Miss Marple, Miss Warple. "I'm sure you've caught a chill." Sorry about the last bit. Sorry about laughing. Oh, blimey. Oh, it's always funny watching people laugh, is it? What else was in that kettle? Yes, I know. Sorry about that. "My friend is also in hospital, very ill," says Lee Lawson, "with COVID, and my cousin died on New Year's Eve with COVID. I need cheering up." Well, I hope that my laughing cheered you up. It shows you're enjoying. I hope you're enjoying the book, everybody. Oh, and hello to Josh, who I was chatting to on the phone only earlier today and made a recording for the In Conversation With, which will be out on Sunday to the patrons. Chapter 9. I will try not to fall about laughing in this one. And it is really about time we met the girl, this Margaret of Dame Eleanor's. It is difficult to tell with parlour maids, particularly with good ones. They are as professional and impersonal as waiters. Their private lives may be anything or nothing. And it is the same with their thoughts. You never know what they're thinking. As for ladies' companions, they have to be more impersonal still. You simply can't have a woman with views of her own. The whole secret of a good lady's companion is always to be there and never to be noticed. That, at least, was Dame Eleanor's view, and, in consequence, she had worked her way through a whole regiment of women in her time. One by one they had proved themselves human and therefore ineligible. Unexpected failings pronounced and unexpected failings pronounced and therefore fatal characteristics had successively revealed themselves. There had been Miss Ridley, for instance, 42, strictly C of E, excellent references from a titled family. She had developed Christian Science. Miss Arbuthnot, 39, well-connected, musical in a quiet, inoffensive way. There she had perpetual colds. Mrs. Perriter, 26, mousy, almost abnormally silent, and a thoroughly competent letter writer. Her paternal fear of burglars rendered her too unrestful. With Miss Stanley, aged 44, it was the second coming, and with Miss Gibbs, aged 33, it was her teeth. So the list went on, always some unsuspected defect that made further employment impossible. Dame Eleanor, in fact, had just about come to the end of her tether and decided on promoting Margaret. At any rate, she felt that she knew what she was doing. It would not be a shot in the dark this time, with a lot of valueless references to ponder over. Margaret had been with her for the best part of 7 years. Admittedly, the first 2 of them had been spent almost exclusively in the kitchen, but Dame Eleanor was a keen manager. She kept an eye on her even then, and when the girl was first allowed to appear at table, naturally she had been watched even more closely. At first, she had not been quite suitable. There was too much life in her. She had radiated a cruel animal health, and with the food that Dame Eleanor provided, she looked as though she was fairly bursting out of her clothes. But Dame Eleanor and the housekeeper between them eventually managed to quieten her down and get her to do her thick dark hair so that tendrils of it didn't keep escaping from under her lace cap. Her parents' death, too, helped matters enormously. She went away, buxom, red-cheeked, immature, but brought face to face with the grimmer realities of life, she changed completely. By the time she came back, she was almost anemic-looking and quieter. Dame Eleanor took one look at her and made her a parlour-maid straight away. Of course, with a girl of Margaret's background for company, it would be inevitable that Dame Eleanor would have to do more things for herself. She wouldn't be able to throw unwanted correspondence across the breakfast table as she'd had been able to do in Miss Perrotter's day. And Margaret didn't really understand little things like seating plans for dinner, and which blooms to cut from the hothouse, and whom to admit when Dame Eleanor had said quite definitely that she was out. On the other hand, she was restful. After a day spent with the GCS and the NAVPTCW and the unmarried mothers, it was positively soothing to get back to Putney and find Margaret waiting for her. In fact, she had by now grown to rely upon her entirely. She had even intended to make some small token recognition for her dependence, say £100, if still in my service at the time of my decease, in a codicil of her will, that Messrs. Thring, Goodfellow and Thring of Lincoln Inn held for her. There had, in fact, been only one tussle between them during the whole 7 years, and that took place during the week succeeding Margaret's promotion. Clothes. Margaret's clothes were the cause of her trouble. The foolish creature didn't seem properly to appreciate her new position. She simply went on wearing housemaid's uniform, and when Dame Eleanor told her quite definitely that this would have to stop, she was greeted by a most astonished revelation. Margaret had no money. At first, Dame Eleanor was totally unable to believe this. The girl never went anywhere. Her walking-out clothes were the simplest. She didn't bet. She didn't drink. She didn't go to theatres. She hasn't got any family. Her only sister was married and provided for. She had no brothers. For 7 years she had been fed, housed, and paid a regular weekly wage. Lately she'd been getting as much as 25 shillings a week, and for all that she had to show for it she might have been giving her services for free. Dame Eleanor was astounded. In the end, she advanced the money herself. But where could Margaret's money have gone? It still fascinated her. She could conclude only that the girl had some indignant relation somewhere that she was supporting. It was typical of her class to behave in that way. One of her chief failings of the poor was that they never knew where to draw the line with relatives. They went on helping them long after they had shown themselves unrescuable. Another slurp of this fine, laughing concoction. Then suddenly, sharply, Dame Eleanor remembered her own son, and her lips tightened. God knew she'd done enough to set him on his feet again, and God knew that she had gone on doing it after he'd proved that he was no use. But that had been nearly 5 years before that she had stopped his allowance. By now, he had either made a man of himself or gone under. She didn't know which, because it was so long since she had heard from him. She prayed for him every night, but that was the only contact she had. How are you all doing? Are you doing well out there? Michael White, I can't get a proper signal from my network, so I'm missing most of the reading. I'll just have to say good afternoon and see you later. Oh, sorry about that, Michael. What a shame. I can't get a proper signal. I'm missing out most of the... yes, later tonight. Okay, fair enough. I can't get a proper signal. Yeah, you said that 3 times. See you later, Michael. Enjoying the reading, says the lovely Julia. It must be catching. My internet is playing up too. Oh, no. Anybody else having issues? It's not my end, is it? It's all that laughing I did. Right, we're in part 2 of chapter 9. Dame Eleanor had just been settled in. Her detective story from the circling library was on the table beside the bed, with a volume of memoirs underneath, just in case she lost patience with the detective story and cut things short by jumping straight away to the last chapter. A little to one side of her reading a little to one side, with her reading glasses on the top of it, stood a small volume of radio sermons entitled The Voice in Your Ear, and a prayer book. These were for reading last of all, a kind of final late extra, just before she put out the light. On the other side stood the water carafe, a small bottle of sleeping tablets, some aspirins, and an inhaler. The telephone, Dame Edna's diary, a small writing pad, a propelling pencil, an electric torch, in case the mains failed, and a police whistle stood on the lower shelf of the table. Dame Eleanor had... it's interesting. A propelling pencil, I believe, is one of those that you click, isn't it? When I remember reading that, either this or one of his early books, because he'd mentioned a propelling pencil before, and I thought it was like some device that would fire a whole pencil for whatever reason. But then I did look it up, and I think it's a pencil that is propelled into the nib area, that you click. I think that's what it is. Goodness gracious. Anyway, Dame Eleanor, her head swathed in a muslin mob cap, her two straw-like plaits resting on her shoulders, was now sitting up in her bed jacket that was quilted like a diver's. Since she had left home 9:15 that morning on her way to the Crusade headquarters, until she had returned at 10:30 from the evening rally of the Anti-Vice Association, this was the first moment that she could really call her own. But not her own entirely. That worthless son of hers kept coming into it again. When she was tired like this, she always was defenceless against him. It all became clear to her. She knew why it really was that she had spent all her time on these committees, simply because she hadn't got Derek. If she still had him by her, then there would have been grandchildren, a whole new life to occupy her. And she wanted grandchildren more than anyone could believe. She was crying now, yes, actually crying. And angry as well. Her detective story slid off the bed and was lying there, crumpled and ignored. "Oh, God," she said fervently, "help me to forget. Make him a good man, God, but please help me to forget." Margaret doesn't go upstairs to bed these days. Her bedroom is now at the end of the passage on Dame Eleanor's floor. It is a pleasant room, with flowered wallpaper and a Wilton carpet, only a little faded. It has done service earlier in this one guest room. It had done service earlier in one of the guest rooms that had been cut to fit the walls. Margaret is very proud of the carpet. It is the first time that she has ever had a carpet in a bedroom. The stain where Mrs. Arbuthnot had split her hand lotion, and the burn where Miss Gibbs' electric light had toppled forward, are scarcely noticeable in the way she has arranged the rug and the easy-chair. But tonight she's not thinking about the carpet. She has a letter to write. There is no desk in the room, and everywhere she wants to write a letter, whenever she wants to write a letter, which is once every 14 days, she has to use the dressing table. The ink and the paper and the pen are in one of the small drawers close at hand. But before she starts her letter, she takes out a newspaper that she keeps specially for the purpose and spreads it out on top of the embroidered linen runner. She doesn't want any tell-tale blots or splashes to reveal what she's been up to. From the way she arranges the pen and then pulls the dressing stool exactly into position, it is obvious that she is not an easy letter writer, nor does she hold the pen as though writing were natural to her. She writes with her forefinger bent as though only enormous pressure would produce any of the words at all. But she knows what it is she wants to say, and she remains there, bent over the dressing table, her image in the mirror leaning forward to meet her for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Then she sits back and slowly reads what she has written. There is one place where she has left out a word, and there is only one word, believe, that she did not know how to spell. Binding up her forefinger again, she inks in the I and the E so that no one will know which one really came first. And last of all, she opens her handbag. It is a plain black bag with a snap clasp that Dame Eleanor had given her last year for Christmas, and takes out a money order for £2. She studies it closely for a moment to make sure that it's been filled in properly, and then pops it in the envelope. After she's written the address and stamped the envelope and made sure that it stuck down properly, she sits there, thoughtfully, staring out of the dusk window. Oh. What is going on? What do you think is happening? We have arrived at Book 2, Boy Meets Girl, Chapter 10. We have a couple of minutes. Is it worth getting into that? Shall we? Dare we? Or should we wait for tomorrow? It's not quite 10:2. Black ink, of course, Dudley. Must be classier. To explain the mysterious affair that kept the whole hospital awake and on its toes from midnight until dawn is no use going to Dr. Trump or to any of the authorities. The only person who could have given a satisfactory explanation was Ginger Woods. Ginger for the opening of the incident and Sweetie for the finish. Even then, it started only because Ginger had always wanted a weapon. Not any particular kind of weapon, just a weapon, something sharp to stab or slash or jab with. Once, more than a year ago, and then for something less than a week, he'd been the owner of a penknife, but it had been taken away from him, confiscated in class by Mr. Dawlish. The knife was still in Mr. Dawlish's possession. Ginger knew that because Mr. Dawlish brought it out sometimes and used it for scraping round the inside of the bowl of his pipe. The bowl of Mr. Dawlish's pipe was old and clogged up, and every time it was used, the blade came away, blunt and messy. That was why Ginger was so pleased with his new weapon, his bow and arrow, his invention. And it was a real weapon this time, something that would be able to kill, or at least maim, at anything up to 25 yards. In the entire hospital, only one other boy, Spud Carter, knew anything about it, and Ginger had pledged Spud to secrecy by promising that he could have a turn with it when it was finished. In point of fact, it was going to be finished after tea today. That's what made this afternoon so important. He had got the string, better than string in fact, blind cord, in his pocket, and that was all that was needed. The frame was a bamboo curtain rod that should by rights have belonged in one of the master's dormitories. The shaft was a long slither of wood that had been lying around on the manual side. Not that the shaft was just a slither of wood any longer. Ginger had pointed it by rubbing it up against the brickwork of the storehouse at the far end of the playground, and he had feathered it as well. His last 2 cigarette cards were neatly folded at right angles to each other and rested in the slot in the hilt. Unusually, there was nothing much to do in the tea break. Indeed, on the face of it, today looked exactly like any other day. Mr. Dawlish, with his coat collar accidentally turned up as though he were in the midst of a private winter of his own creation, was mooching up and down, his feet dragging and his eyes suspiciously slanting from side to side on the lookout for horseplay, or smoking behind the boiler sheds, or worse. Ginger and Spud went by him, deliberately sauntering and saying nothing. They knew that as soon as they had passed, he would turn and look over his shoulder. That's why they kept up their aloofness until he was at the far end of the playground and out of sight behind the senior block. Then Spud spoke. "Think it'll work?"
What'll work? Our bow and arrow. Who says it's ours?
You did. I didn't.
You said I could have turns.
Having turns don't make it yours.
But I can, can't I?
You can if you shut up.
Shut up yourself.
There was silence. The two boys walked on together. Equity had been maintained. And also friendship. But because Spud was not seeking to press his point of ownership, it was a clear victory for Ginger, and both boys knew this. When they reached the boiler sheds, Ginger went flat on his face and began reaching under the steps for his treasure. It was there, all right. The curtain rod, the pointed strip of wood. Ginger was relieved. Underneath the steps of the boiler house was his private hiding place. Before Ginger attempted to string the bow, however, he stationed Spud as a lookout. And whatever you do, he told him in an unnecessary whisper, don't holler. If you see old Dawley coming, stamp your foot 3 times. It was the fact that the genius of Ginger had devised a code that persuaded Spud to do what he was told. Simply to have been told as a lookout would have been unworthy, humiliating. But a code promoted the occasion. It was deeply gratifying to Spud to be able to look round the crowded playground and reflect that he spoke the language that no one else knew. There was a kind of magic in the fact that he could talk to Ginger simply by raising up his foot. All the same, it was a bit tedious just standing there. He couldn't even lean against the wall. Dr. Trump was very hot on lounging, and if Mr. Dawlish spotted him, he was sure to be coming all the way down to the playground to jaw him. "How you getting on?" he asked.
"You shut up," came the answer. "Nearly finished. Shut up, I said. Want any help?" "Not from you." This time Spud was offended. "What's wrong with me?" he asked angrily. "You talk too much." "What about? What about you, rather?" "Don't interrupt. I'm working." The last was, as a matter of fact, untrue. Ginger had stopped working 5 minutes ago. His weapon was finished, and he was just squatting there on his haunches, gloating over it. After all, it was his bow and arrow, and he wanted to have the first shot without Spud bothering him. But at the very moment, vanity overcame him. "Come and have a look at it if you like," he said casually. "Then get back like I said." The bamboo curtain rod was certainly elegant. It was bent into a firm crescent, and the blind cord was taut and twangy. Ginger began to point out the several beauties of his craftsmanship. "See them knots?" he said. "They're nautical." "What's nautical?" "Same as what scouts use," Ginger replied contemptuously. "You gonna fire it?" Spud asked. "Course I am," Ginger replied. "What do you think I made it for?" "What you gonna aim at?" Ginger looked round the playground with a marksman's eye. It was while he was pondering that Mr. Dawlish took up his place in front of the school door and blew his whistle. It was a wheezy sort of blow, because Mr. Dawlish always carried his whistle loose in his pocket with his pipe, and the whistle was all bunged up with fluff and fragments of tobacco. But the thin shriek reached Ginger's ears all right. He turned angrily to Spud. "There, you see," he said. "That's what comes from talking." Spud wrinkled up his nose. "Garn," he answered. "You 'fraid?" "I'm not." "Then shoot with it." "What at?" The playground had half emptied already, and with every moment the conversation was becoming more urgent. Both boys were desperate. "Shoot at the wall." "What, and break me arrow?" But Spud did not reply. He was gazing intently up into the sky at a fat-breasted Putney pigeon that was coming towards them, travelling flat out towards Wimbledon on his peculiar business. "Bet you couldn't kill that pigeon." "Bet I could." "Bet you couldn't." "Got to go now, anyway." "Told you couldn't," Spud replied exultantly. "It's a rotten bow and arrow." It was that last remark that goaded Ginger. He was so furious he narrowed up his eyes and stuck out his bottom lip. Then, just as the pigeon passed over, he braced himself and released the shaft. The pigeon was safe enough. It didn't even know that it had been a living target. But if Spud was right about Ginger's aim, he was wrong about the weapon. It was an excellent bow and arrow. The almost surgical pointed arrow shaft rose higher and higher in the sunlight, then turned in the air and, spinning like a bullet, passed out of sight over the row of broken bottles into the girl's side. The two boys looked aghast, looking after it. "Now you've done it," said Spud. And there, my friends, we will have to leave it. The arrow is on the girl's side. What will they do? They'll have to go and get it, won't they? Or something. Anyway, hope you enjoyed today's reading. Thank you very much. Dare you. Oh, the butler's just brought me a cup of tea and Welsh cake, says Lee Lawson. Fantastic. Nice to be here. Nice to do the reading. Hope the laughing and my poor reading didn't put you off too much. My tea is now cold. Got to go and put wood in the Essie. But I'll be back with the Vogue Show tonight with the lovely Julia, all being well. So hope you will join us then. Thank you very much for coming along. 5 o'clock coming up. Keep smiling. Start of another week. And I will catch up with you tomorrow on the reading, tonight on the Vogue Show. How about that? Couldn't be better. Anyway, lovely to see you. Thanks for drifting by. Till next time. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.